The next book he wrote with a guy named Jonathan Storment, and it's called Bringing Heaven to Earth. And it is about how we don't have to wait until someday for the Lord to show up and be active in our world. Where God is in our world today, and it's bringing heaven to earth. And it is a great book. Let me check it real quick. This one has study questions in the back. So it's a good book for that. This next book that Josh wrote has also got study questions in the back. And this has been a very popular book for churches to work through. It's called Reentry. And the tagline on this book is How Pain, Roots, and Rhythm Guide Us from Darkness to Light. We knew before Josh wrote this book that the highest alcoholism rate and suicide rate in the 50 states is in Alaska. What we didn't know is that the most suicides in Alaska happen not while it's dark, but during the first week or two when the light begins to reappear. Because darkness zaps your energy. And so it's about how do you re-enter life after grief? How do you re-enter life after addiction? How do you re-enter life after a season of hard? And it is an excellent book. A lot of churches, Josh has got a lot of really good feedback on this because of the conversations and discussions. Celebrate Recovery have used this book. Mac and Mary Owen have written part of it, the tag for it. So those three books are out there. Everything I do in my life professionally is on a sliding scale. I'm asking $10 for each book. If you have $20 and want all three books, that's great. If you don't have any money and you want all three books, that's great. Whatever you want to do with that is fine with me. I'm asking that much, but everything I do is on a suggested fee. So if these books will bless you and help you, please snag them. Rick, we're going to let you go, and I'll finish, and then you can finish.
She's asking for $10 a book. I'm asking for a couple of extra dollars just for me with the purchase of each book. That's a preacher for you, huh? Paula DeArchie once said, I know this, you can't die from crying or I'd be dead. For much of my life, I was one of those guys, men don't cry. And I didn't cry very easily at all. In fact, it took a lot for me to cry. But ever since my daughter's death, crying's become much more common for me. And you know what? Beverly can tell you, are you going to talk about tears and all that? No, I don't want to do that. I mean, she's going to talk about that in a little bit, but there's something purifying. And God's made us that way. There's something purifying about allowing ourselves to cry. And so it was only a few weeks after Jenny had died that I remember Josh called me one Sunday morning. He's my oldest son. And, my younger son at that time was in ministry. My older son's a preacher in Memphis. Beverly's in ministry in her way. I'm a minister, so we're a family of ministers. And Josh said, Dad, you know that we're going to be playing Wounded for a while. And then he said, you remember Emmett Smith? Y'all remember Emmett Smith? He said, one of Emmett Smith's best games in his career, he played with separated shoulder. He said, Dad, that's what we're going to be doing as ministers. We're going to be playing Wounded for a while. And I totally agree with what he said. But I'll tell you this. There's many times since he said that I've thought, and I would trade a separated shoulder for a broken heart any day of the week. Because we're playing with a broken heart. That's tough. So often I'm reminded of something that Jenny said one time. Jenny had our first granddaughter, Malaya, And after that, they wanted to have more children, but Jenny was suffering from secondary infertility. And it was an agonizing process. I mean, she wanted another baby so badly, and she did all the tests and went through, I mean, lots of money that she and David spent on trying to have another baby. And our family went into a period of fasting. We prayed, we fasted, we were doing this for several months. And finally she gathered the family together one Thanksgiving. And she said, Mom, you know, you raised us kids to live in such a way that it reflected what we wanted people to say about us at our funeral. What do you want people to say about you at your funeral? Whatever it is, you need to live into that. And she said, and you know, I don't want people coming up to my casket when I'm dead and saying, there's that poor old lady who never did have any more kids. She said, I want people to walk by my casket and say, there's a woman who, even though she didn't get her way, she still chose to praise God. And so, there's a verse in Scripture that I think speaks so clearly into that. And I love this verse. It's in Habakkuk chapter 3, and beginning in verse 17. And I'm reading from the New Living Translation, okay? This is what it says. Even though the fig tree has no blossoms, and there are no grapes on the vines, in other words, even though our crops are devastated, even though the olive crops fail, and the fields lie empty and barren, even though the flocks die in the fields and the cattle barns are empty, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. And you know what? That's the way we need to be walking even in grief. Is making the choice that our lives are still going to be a praise to God. That's my 5 minutes.
That was a good 5 minutes. Somebody say truth. You know, we ended our last time together talking about the numbing emotion. When you numb emotion, numbing is not, it's not an event that only numbs the negative emotion. When you attempt to numb emotion, negative emotion, it numbs all emotion. People who numb emotion without experiencing, and say it like this, without giving yourself permission to experience the pain, you will not find joy. Numbing numbs it all. It's not exclusive to just the negative. And so we've got this wrestle as grievers. What do we do with this heavy amount of emotion? What do we do when the grief waves just go over and we even talk about, I'm just drowning in this. I'm drowning in this emotion. Let's talk about it from that angle for a moment. Last time we were together, we talked about physical. Let's spend a few moments, and really and true, I know with this part, I'm running around with an appetizer tray going, try this, try this, try this. I mean, this would be months if we were even in grief group together, talking about the emotion of this. Rick alluded to the tears. I think this is so fascinating. The tears of grief contain a totally different biology than any other tears. The tears of grief contain toxins. The tears of grief contain cortisol, which is your stress hormone. They have to be shed. You have got to give yourself permission. Now, some of you are thinking, I'm not a crier. It's okay. Give yourself permission not to cry, too. But when you feel like you need to cry, find an outlet. Find a space. I have walked in Walmart many walked in shoe stores many times that I had to just U-turn and walk right back out and go to my car and throw a big fit. I walked in Walmart. I've walked in Walmart and gone, how are you people shopping? Do you not know Jimmy died? What are you doing? I had to turn right around and get back in my car. We give ourselves permission. The word I really want you to hang on to about the emotion is get curious. Get curious. Frequently, grievers report that they are either sad or they are mad. Anger is not, if you were in my office right now, I'd be leaning across and I'd be holding your hands for this one. Listen to this. Anger is not ever a primary emotion. If you find yourself going into anger, there is something underneath it. That is your body's cry. Deal with this other thing. It's fear. It can be frustration. It's typically fear. It can be guilt. It can be feeling inferior. It can be trauma. And so many of our grief experiences, whether it's divorce or child walk away from the Lord, it involves a traumatic reaction, a trauma reaction. Get curious about it. I encourage you. We give these away in our grief groups, and you can find them online too, but this is a color of feelings, where it's just an artist palette with tons of feelings on it. I passed these out in a grief group, and I said, which two are you experiencing tonight? And I had one woman in our last grief group say, I don't even like this word, but it hooked me the moment I saw it. She said, I'm so confused. And then she said this, I'm jealous. I think that's an okay thing to feel right here. We're jealous. She's jealous that other people have a different story than her story. She's jealous that even in her church, people get up on Sunday mornings and talk about how the Lord heard the prayers of the faithful, and their child was healed, and hers wasn't. It brings up different emotions, and we lay those before the Lord, but we get curious. People who don't get curious about what they're feeling are more likely to hurt another person with their feelings. Does that make sense? If you don't get curious about it, it frequently comes out as a verbal machine gun. And we don't even know what we're doing with that. We get curious. This is from a book called Courage to Grieve. Emotional pain feels constant only when all our energy is going into suppressing those feelings that are so hard to suppress. We've got to give an outlet. We've got to give voice. For me, it was in journal writing. I wasn't a journaler before this. Listen to me all the way through here. My older son, right in the audience right now, he usually starts shaking his head like this every time I get to this part. He's like, please, Mom, come up with a different, but it's going in a book with his name on it, too. This is the best illustration I've got. You all had a stomach virus. And all that stuff is just churning, and you're thinking, if I could just throw up. I mean, haven't you thought that before? If I could just throw up, I'd feel so much better. After grief for me, it was like all this emotion was just churning, and I didn't even know what to do with it. I had no idea what to do with it. And a journal for me was giving myself permission to throw up on paper. I used to teach first grade, and for my own history, I am a grammar Nazi. I like good grammar. I still talk Texan, but I like good grammar. I like punctuation. And I like capitalizing the right things. So in my own world, this is just me, but I do not capitalize power of darkness or Satan anymore. But I capitalize all things about God. Every time it's a you or a him or a his, that first letter is capitalized. I want to give honor, I want to give glory to him. But you've got to figure out, how do we hold space with all that stuff we don't want to feel? And so for me, it was just getting it out. And it wasn't getting it out in a pretty journal. It was getting it out on a legal pad that I could tear up, but I never want to. You don't go back and examine it or throw up. Just get rid of it. If it's stuff you want to keep, then yeah, put it in a journal. But some of my journal writing, I never wanted to look at know. I'm a counselor. I know you're only supposed to see one counselor at a time. I play that. I know that is true. That is ethical. But I was an overachiever at grief, and I saw 3. I worked with 3 counselors. Now, when you are a counselor, you're usually in counseling over Olive Garden breadsticks or chips and salsa. You know, it's usually an eating out event. You're in counseling all the time when you're a counselor. We are not afraid to ask each other the hard questions. And one of my grief therapists over chips and salsa said one time, strength is way overrated. You need to give it up. Give it up. Quit trying to be the strong one here. As one of my other friends put it, quit trying to rescue God. God can take care of that. It's not time for you to have to rescue him. It's time for you to allow yourself to be embraced by him. You can speak a word for him after you have rested in his love again. I went into hyper mode. Could not figure out how to bring honor to his name after this. Just rest in it emotionally. Allow yourself to get curious. Allow yourself to write out about the guilt. We all play, well, I say most of us play, the what-if game after any grief. What if I? What if I? What if I had done this? What if I had done that? Am I being punished for something I've done before? All this is stuff I've heard a lot of. Am I being punished for something my mother did? Is this from my childhood? I knew this would happen. It's where we claim the grace and mercy of Jesus. It's where we learn to rest. Are you telling the grace and mercy story? I don't even know. I'm telling it right here. Mike Cope, it was the minister at Highland and Abilene when Jenny died, and Mike and Diane had buried a little girl too. I think Megan was 10. Mike called Rick in between death and funeral. There's a couple things he said you need to know. Number 1, don't ever change your bio. You will always have 3 children. I love that. I'd already been thinking about that. I'd already been thinking, what about our bios? What are we going to say? How are we going to take Jenny out? And I've got to tell you this. I got to tell you, and I don't always say this to churches, but I've only told it a couple of times. I'm going to tell you this, and this is a confession on my part. Rick was speaking in West Texas. It's been several years after Jenny died. It was his 3rd event he had done for this church in West Texas. He had done grief work with that church. They all knew we had Jenny. They all knew the story. Rick handed his bio. Can you tell I'm passionate about this? This really bugged me. Rick typed up his own bio and handed it to the youth minister to introduce him that night. When the youth minister got up to the pulpit to introduce Rick, he said, we're so delighted to have the Rosses. Rick and Beverly Ross are here tonight. They had 2 children and 4 grandchildren. They not only took out Jenny, they took out Jenny's daughter. Rick was in his own world going over his notes. And I began praying. This is confession time right here. Beverly Ross began praying, do not throat punch this man when church is open. Let him go. Just let him go. But I was reminded in that moment something Mike Cope said. Don't ever change your bio. But then he said this. People are going to say some really stupid stuff. Truth? But they're giving you the very best they've got. Cover them with grace and mercy. Now, every time I say that, I do this. Grace and mercy. I think I'm under Niagara Falls, where I can't hear you, and I can't throat punch you. Grace and mercy. Grace and mercy. But I also think that is a very important move to make with ourselves. Grace and mercy. Grace and mercy. Grace and mercy. We learn to live there with our emotions. Now we've got this other little emotion, really big, and really from the Spirit, called joy. What are you going to do about joy? What are you going to do about joy? It is my belief system. And when I say belief system, I mean 100% belief system. That grief and joy can hold hands. Now, I had a minister ask me one time, how is that true? Because you also teach that the human brain cannot experience two conflicting emotions at the same time. And I do teach that, and I believe that. Your brain will never experience gratitude and anxiety at the same time. Can't do it. Cannot do it. That's why Philippians 4. Be anxious about nothing, but pray with thanksgiving about everything, so that the peace of God can rule in your hearts. Think on these things, so that the peace of God can rule in your hearts. But you see, grief and joy are not opposing emotions, because they are both rooted in love. You do not grieve what you do not love, and joy is rooted in love, because joy is from the Holy Spirit. I remember the day something shifted inside of me with this concept. I was in an audience. I was listening to kind of a panel of speakers. There was a beautiful young black woman that stood up and began to tell her testimony of she had this man she was so in love with. And in their early 20s, he walked away from Jesus, became a Muslim. And she broke up with him because she said, I can't be with somebody that doesn't follow Jesus. And she said, for years I thought the Lord would repay that by giving me a better man. But here she is. She was in her early 40s, mid-40s, and she said, no other man has come along. But she said, I still believe John 10:10. The thief has come to steal, to kill, and to destroy. But Jesus has come that even a single woman can have abundant life. Jesus has come that even a grieving mother can have abundant life. Jesus has come that you and I, while our feet walk on dirt, can live in the abundance with joy. Joy is the most foreboding of all the human emotions. What that means is joy is the scariest emotion to feel. Exactly how Rick opened this. We spent January going, come on, dudes, life get better than this. Come on, does it? Constantly. I had a huge decision to make. Was I ever going to say that again? For a long time, I would say, I love our life, except for the part where Jenny died. And finally, a couple of years ago, we came up with this deal. Let's just say we love our lives, but we both know that we mean we're really sad Jenny died. Our lives are still really good books. They're really bad chapters. I do not believe that you heal from this. That's not the language I like. The language I like is we're going to learn to carry it. We're going to learn to carry this pain. We're going to learn to carry the grief, but we can still experience joy. We're going to learn to carry the pain. In a movie called The Rabbit Hole, it's an old Nicole Kidman movie. Maybe one of her first. I've never heard of the movie. There's a professor at Abilene Christian, Dr. Brady Wise, came up to me after I'd spoken at Summit one year, and he said, you got to watch The Rabbit Hole. There's this one scene in there. And I couldn't watch the movie. It took me probably a couple of years to watch the movie in its entirety, but I did watch it and watch this one scene. The movie is about Nicole Kidman's little boy died. He was 4 years old, hit by a teenage driver. The movie is about how she walked out her grief story. How did she recover marriage? What did she do in grief? And she's in the attic one day with her mom, putting the baby's toys up. Her mother had buried her husband, Nicole's father, and a son from a drug overdose, Nicole's brother. And it's a dark scene. And Nicole says, Mom, does it ever get easier than this? And the mom looks far away. She said, oh, baby, I don't know if it gets easier or not. She said, you just learn to carry And one day, the brick's not your first thought when you wake up. But you're going to make your morning coffee and you bump into the cabinet and you're like, oh yeah, the brick. Or you go to put your hand in your pocket to get out a Kleenex and you're like, oh yeah, the brick. We're going to carry it. I love that analogy. We're going to learn to carry our grief so that we can still experience joy. In my office, in the waiting room, I walk through a living room to get to our waiting room. And as soon as I open the door to get my clients out of the waiting room, I have a sign that a friend has made me. We had to switch it. When she made it the first time, it says this: joy and grief can hold hands. And I'm like, oh, Shelley, can we switch that up? She said, what do you want? I said, I really want grief and joy. Because I need the J to be a capital J and not at the beginning of the sentence. Because I need to remember that my joy is found in Jesus. She said, I'll do that. Let me switch it up. She made me a new G for grief to go at the beginning of the sentence. So every time I open that up, I see grief and joy can hold hands. Grief and joy can hold hands. We have to get curious about ourselves emotionally, curious about what we're experiencing. Not too long after Jenny died, it was probably within the first month, one of my daughter-in-laws walked into my kitchen. She said, I got a question for you. When this daughter-in-law says that, kind of like Josh, you go, okay, stop. I will not stir the spaghetti because I want to know what the question is. She said, you going to be bitter? What was she asking me? You see, I think what she was asking me is, are you still going to be a fun granny for my kids? You still going to scratch the boys back and laugh with them at bedtime? What's this house going to be like at Christmas? Are we still going to dance in the kitchen and act crazy? Or is this going to be the bitter home now? Turned around and I looked at my sweet girl. I said, you know what? I'm not sure yet how not. I don't know the rest of the story. But I'm promising you to stay. I will not be bitter. I don't know what it's going to look like. But I'm not going to be bitter. And then Jimmy's birthday rolled around. And I decided that day that I will never allow, and I'm declaring this to you again, I will never allow the pain of her death to overshadow the joy of her life. I will always celebrate that I had her. I will always celebrate that this man is my husband, no matter what. I will always celebrate that we had good moments together, good seasons together. I will not allow myself to step in to darkness and just stay there. What we do is we figure out how do we hold space with emotion and still find joy in the Spirit? How? That question kind of hangs in the room. And we will talk more about that tomorrow night, and we will talk more about that Sunday morning. What do we do about those hard emotions? We get curious about them.
Okay.
Do you want me to go more? Like, I always have something more to say. Let's talk more about that. I think we're good.
Okay.
We're good.
You're really good.
Thank you.
Since Jenny's death, I've come to view grief personally differently than I had before. Because as a minister, I had walked with people through their grief. I had tried to help people along the way. But I had no idea, kind of like Beverly was saying, after Jenny died, is this really what it feels like. I mean, I had not experienced the kind of grief I was trying to help other people walk with. Does that make sense? But all of that changed. And I realized just how painful are the things that people are having to carry. And so now when I hear on the news about a young man who's been killed in a car wreck, man, my heart hurts for that family. For that family that's left to mourn that loss. When I hear about a mother who dies of breast cancer and she's got little kids that she leaves behind, I think about those kids and that husband. Oh, the grief. Up to that time, I had mourned the death of my dad, and I had mourned the death of my father-in-law, who was more like a dad to me than my dad was. But it just wasn't the same. You kind of expect those who are older than you to go, you know. I remember my grandfather, who was in his 90s, when my dad died at 66. And my granddad said, it's just not supposed to be this way. You're not supposed to bury your own kids. And so Paul asked this question in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, which, by the way, is probably in my top 3 favorite chapters in the whole Bible. I told my boys, if I happen to go out in the way that I'm in a hospital bed or whatever, I want you boys reading 1 Corinthians 15. But Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, in verse 55, "O death, where is your sting?" Paul, I think I can tell you where that sting is. And I'm trying to be smart alecky here. That sting is piercing the hearts of people who are grieving a loss. And you know what? Sometimes that sting feels like you're being swarmed with about 1,000 killer bees. Now, I understand what Paul's saying, okay? Paul's saying Jesus is taking the sting out of death. And that's true. But when you're going through it, it doesn't feel like it, does it? And so there's so many spiritual things that I used to think, man, I grew up in our tradition. So, there were these things, I thought we had all these answers just neat, put together so nice and neat. And suddenly, here I am a preacher. And all that neat theology looks more like a fishing reel that's bird nested. It's just all knotted up. I remember not long after Jenny had died, one of my mentors in life, one of my spiritual mentors is Lynn Anderson, and some of you are probably familiar with Lynn Anderson, but Lynn called me up. And I said, Lynn, man, I've got to tell you. And we'll talk more about this later, but we had 13,000 people who were praying for Jenny. And I'm not far from becoming a deist. I mean, you know what deism is? It's basically this belief that many of our founding fathers had, that God entered the world and He created the world, but He kind of wound it up and then He's left. He's left the scene. He's retired. I said, Lynn, I'm kind of struggling with this idea that maybe deism's true. And Lynn said, Rick, let me just give you a word of advice. Don't be making theological decisions when you're in the midst of grief. That's where you kind of have to go to what you're really grounded in, Just sit with that. And so I've struggled with faith. What is faith? For much of my life, faith meant a system of belief. So I got to researching that a little bit. Did you know, if you looked it up in Webster's dictionary, a system of found in Webster's dictionary until the fourth definition. First definition of faith in Webster's is an allegiance to a person. Second definition of faith is belief and trust in God. So I just sat with that for a while and it came to me. That's where I live and breathe right now. Because faith to me is allegiance to Jesus Christ and putting my trust in God. Faith is trust. Larry's probably covered this with you, or maybe you're just aware of this. Greek and Hebrew really messed with us on this word for faith. Because in both languages, the word belief and faith and trust is the same word. Now, how do you distinguish what the biblical writer is really saying? How would you do that? Context, that's the only way you can do it. But if you notice, particularly the King James Version, almost always goes to belief, which in my opinion is the very weakest form of that word. I can believe something and not necessarily take a step onto it. But if I trust it, that means I'm going to step into it. With me? So that's where I am now. There's these words that are just huge to me. Trust, peace, hope. These are the anchors where my faith rests. And like a desperate, drowning person, I hold on to those things for dear life. There is no option B. Right? So, Larry, you want to come and close this out? Do you have anything else you wanted to share? Thank you all for being here this evening. I'll tell you what, y'all are excellent listeners. I mean, it really is encouraging as a speaker to look into the eyes of people that you go, they're really connecting with this. So I'm grateful for that. You don't count.
Thank you very much.
You do count.